there, everyone. My name is Kelpie Wilson. Welcome to the Regen Soil Conference 2024 with Matt Powers. Matt, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. I'm really happy to be able to share what I've got with everyone. So I'm Kelpie. I do biochar, and let me share my screen, and we'll get started. Okay, so I want to talk to you about biochar gardens and how to make biochar. Yeah. So who am I? I have a couple of companies actually, Wilson Biochar LLC, Wilson Biochar Associates. I sell the Ring of Fire Biochar Kiln. I'm the author of the Biochar Handbook, newly published by Chelsea Green this last summer. I was a founding member of the U.S. Biochar Initiative and have chaired their Biochar in the Woods Committee for the past few years. I've been a biochar consultant since 2008. I've worked for the International Biochar Initiative. I've worked for a lot of the companies that have started biochar production. Um, and I do a lot of workshops and training, as well as selling my kilns and designing kilns. My education is I have a degree in mechanical engineering. And the other main qualification I have is I'm a gardener and a serious gardener. And with my garden partners, we feed two families plus a lot more. So here's my book. I'm very pleased with how it came out. And I think it's quite comprehensive. And if you're just starting with biochar, or if you've been doing it for a while, I think you'll find some very interesting information in this book, practical tips, as well as a good background in the science. So you can understand what you're doing and do your own experiments. And thank you so much, Matt, for the wonderful review and endorsement of the book. That just really thrilled me that you took the time to read it and write such a nice review. And so I've got the book, and I've also got a course coming up being offered through Regenerative Living Online. This will be a 9-week course. The book will be a textbook for the course, and we'll go through most of the chapters in the book. And there'll be plenty of time for interaction, questions, discussion. And I'm really looking forward to that. There is early bird pricing from now until close to the end of December, so check that out if you think you might be interested. Today, I want to talk to you first. I'm going to introduce you to my biochar garden because I think that'll kind of help you understand and put everything in context that I want to tell you about. Then I will go over, briefly, how does biochar work and what makes it so special and interesting. Then I'll get into a few details about how I use biochar in my production system. And then I will give you some ideas for how you can make your own biochar. So this is my biochar garden. I've got 40 raised beds in here. Most of them are about 4 feet wide by about 10 feet long. We grow a big variety of crops every year. Um, that's a fig tree there, lots of squashes there. Here we've got some kale with a buckwheat cover crop, and here is some more squash and flowers, some beets with some cilantro, and some delicata. I love to use trellises. Some peppers with flowers. We always plant a lot of flowers for our pollinators. We've had some nice tomato and core crops. And we generally get a lot of food, lots of carrots. Carrots are really good. Tons of onions. I mean, hundreds of pounds of onions every year. Um, and got a really nice raspberry patch. Zucchinis are always prolific. And like I said, tons and tons of flowers. Here's my garden partner, Kate, with some of our flowers, this year's onion harvest. And here, even in November, there's lots of food in the garden. The cover crop is doing well. There's Barney the barn cat guarding the garden. Lots of cabbages, broccoli, kale, parsnips, leeks, carrots, potatoes, and lettuce, even today in the middle of November. So one year we decided to kind of pile up all of our produce and just take a picture of it all, and it's good quality. We're growing some really good food, and it's making a difference to our health and the health of our families. So it's very worthwhile what we're doing. And biochar is a big help. So what is biochar? Well, biochar, it's charcoal, okay? But it's charcoal that is suitable for soil, that you can add to soil. And it comes in many forms depending on what you make it from. You can make it from any kind of biomass, and how you make it. There's different ways to make it. So for instance, if you just take wood-based biochar, which a lot of biochar is made from wood, and you bake it in different processes and at different temperatures. That is one of the biggest determinants of what your biochar is going to be like. So if you make it at a low temperature, it's more like roasting coffee beans. It's not fully charred, but that's good for fuel. Same with barbecue charcoal. It's made at a little higher temperature, but it's still got a lot of tars and oils in it. And so that's good for fuel. It's not that great for soil. The biochar that we make using really simple methods that I'll tell you about is made at a pretty high temperature, and we have a lot of very stable carbon in it. It's very light, very porous, almost like activated charcoal, which you may be familiar with, that people use for water filtration. And so, you see the pie chart there, the stable carbon fraction of our homemade biochar is going to be on the order of about 85%. So that's very high quality biochar for use in soil. Well, how do we really know that biochar works or does anything at all? Well, we've got history to tell us. And biochar first kind of came to the public's attention about 20 years ago when soil scientists started talking about these rich black soils in the Amazon. And it turned out these soils were created by humans. They know this because there's pottery shards everywhere in them. And they've been going on for like 6,000 years. People had been building up these soils on the high bluffs above the Amazon River, where there were actually huge populations of people living before the Europeans arrived. And you can see the difference in the soil here. The black soil with the charcoal, which they called terra preta, grows a wonderful corn crop. The native soil, once you remove the trees from it, the rain just leaches all the nutrients right out of the soil, and it barely grows anything. Another way we know that charcoal is good for soil is from what you might call natural biochar. And there's some of the most fertile soils in the world are what you call mollisols or Chernozems. Those are the soils you find in Iowa and also in Ukraine and Russia on the steppe. And those soils were formed by prairie fires. So you have these very tall grasses, 6, 10 feet tall bunch grasses that would periodically burn off, also helped by Native American burning practices in the US. And there would be a hot, flashy fire that would heat up the thick roots, or the thick stems down near the root zone, but where there wasn't a lot of air, and that would just char, and then it would go out because the fire moved past. So this deposited lots and lots of charcoal in those soils and made them and they're the best soils in the world. So we really believe that charcoal had something to do with that. So how else do we know that biochar is good? Well, since about the year 2000 or so, soil scientists have been doing a lot of research, and agriculturalists have been doing a lot of experimenting. And so there are thousands of published papers now on the impact of biochar on soils and for other uses. And so first of all, we know that it doesn't degrade. It lasts for a very long time. So this helps keep carbon in soil for a long time. You can add biochar and not worry about the carbon degrading and going away. Biochar holds a lot of water, so it holds water in soil. It prevents nutrient loss. It buffers soil pH and EH, which if you've listened to some of Matt's talks about redox, you'll know what that is. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And it really promotes healthy soil microbial life. So it makes a friendly environment for microbes. And as a result, you can see increased plant growth. And this is really remarkable where soils are poor. So, for instance, the picture here shows very dramatic results on a contaminated soil, a metal contaminated soil with biochar. But it's really seems to be good for almost any soil. So what is it doing? What's this black stuff doing in the soil? How is it working in the soil? Well, scale, of course, is the key to understanding what it's doing. And you've got, of course, the micro, the macro, the micro, and the nano scale, the human scale, the bacterial scale, and then the molecular scale. And it works on all these levels. And to understand that, let's look at how is biochar made. It's formed by heat. And so take a piece of wood. It has a cellular structure. That's the vascular structure, the cell walls, everything that makes up that wood structure. And when you heat it and turn it into biochar, a lot of that structure remains. So you still have the pores, the multiporosity at different scales in that biochar material. And then at the nanoscale, what's happening is if you take wood, lignin is the kind of strongest part of the wood, and it has these carbon rings, these six-sided hexagonal carbon rings. And that's what makes wood strong is those rings. They're very stable, but they have other molecules and elements attached to them. They have hydrogen and oxygen. And when you heat that up, the hydrogen and oxygen go away as a gas, and then the remaining carbon links up to make even more of these carbon rings. So these are fused carbon rings, and they condense and make these sheets. Now, these fused carbon rings are the key to the stability of biochar because they're very strong and microbes can't really take them apart. So if you look at the chart here, it shows the difference in the carbon emissions from an uncharred piece of wood versus a piece of biochar. So if you take that piece of wood and just leave it on the ground, it's eventually over 5, 10, 20 years going to be eaten by microbes and fungi, degraded, and most of the carbon is going to return back to the atmosphere. That's the natural carbon cycle. If you take it instead and pyrolyze it, so heat it and turn it to biochar, half the carbon in the wood is immediately going back to the atmosphere because it's a combustion process, but the rest of it is going to stay stable in biochar for thousands of years. And we know char is very stable because we use it for carbon dating. If you if you're an archaeologist and you find an ancient campsite with pieces of charcoal in it, you can carbon date that, and it could be 10,000 years old, and that charcoal is still there. So it's a way of removing carbon from the atmosphere and putting it in soil, which is a very good thing. So these carbon rings, though, are not just stable. They have other properties that are just very interesting. They're electrically active. So when you get 6 carbon atoms linked up together, they are their electron shells, the outer valences aren't completely filled with electrons. So the electrons are kind of free to move around that ring in, they call it a pi orbital cloud. And so these electrons are available for reactions. And that is really part of the interesting thing about how biochar works in soil. And then zooming out a little bit from, the individual atoms, we're going to look now at how those sheets form. And in a natural biochar, in a piece of charcoal that's not, manipulated to make like a graphene sheet, it comes out with these, they're called turbostratic graphene sheets. So it's like a bag of potato chips, these forms. And so then there's pores in between those sheets. So then we get this kind of nanoscale porosity. And so you've got the nanoscale, you've got the molecular structure, the nanoscale porosity, and then at the micro scale, you've got the micropores from the cell walls and the vascular structure of the plant. And so in each one of these surfaces, inside the pore, you've got this going on. So there's just lots of room to hold on to stuff. And the electrical part of it is very interesting. So it's something I'd only learned after getting involved in biochar, but there are some microbes that just live on electrons. And So I love this quote that what drives life is a little electric current kept up by the sunshine through photosynthesis, of course. And here's the kind of crux of it. You're zooming in now on a surface inside of a biochar pore, and it's an electrically charged surface, and all these microbes are living on there happily together in a big community, sharing resources. So we like to call this luxury condos for microbes because everything's included. They've got their water, it holds water, they've got their food, it holds nutrients, and they have electricity and internet because they're sitting there exchanging chemical signals with each other and electrons with each other and living together very efficiently. So biochar actually, the electrical part of it, it acts almost as a battery in soil. And Matt has talked about it that in his redox explanations that or all organic matter, carbon, um, does provide electrons and does fulfill that sort of battery function. But biochar does it even better and it lasts. So it's very useful to have in soil. And so here we get into the pH and EH diagram. EH is the activity level of electrons. pH is the activity level of protons. They're connected to each other. It's quite complex. I don't pretend to understand it, but I do see that adding biochar to soil can buffer the EH in a similar way that, say, adding lime to soil can buffer pH if you have acidic soils, and it can move your soil more into that favorable condition sweet spot. So I want to show you a little example of something that's a bit mysterious here that might be related to redox and EH. And this is a bag of biochar that was produced at a local biomass power plant, the Biomass One power plant in Medford, Oregon. And they gave me this bag of biochar to kind of play with. And so this is just small granular pieces of char straight out of a furnace, nothing in it. It was sitting in my yard for a season. I think I got in the spring. It sat there all summer and now it's fall and I wanted to kind of dig the rest of it out of the bag and use it. So I open up the bag and I see all these roots coming up through the bottom of the bag. I mean, this bag was full of these roots, just chock full. And I figured they came from those pine trees back there. And I'm digging out the roots and I'm seeing that they're covered with biochar. So all these fine root hairs are going into the biochar particles. Well, what is it? What are they after? Because it's been sitting out all summer, hasn't rained all summer. It's dry as a bone. There's no nutrient. It's just straight out of the furnace. It's just pure carbon. What the heck are they after? Could it be electrons? I have no idea. Or could it have been some water that was electrostatically held in on those pore surfaces? I don't know. Maybe one day I'll figure it out. But that is another thing that biochar can do. It holds water in those pores and also electrostatically on the surfaces. So it's quite effective at holding water in soil. And it's often a linear relationship. So the more biochar you put in your soil, the more water it's going to hold. In this example, was in Iowa in 2012. It was a drought year. We're at Iowa State and their biochar plots, and Iowa, already has a lot of char in the soil, so the Iowa soils were already doing better than soils in other states during this drought. But with added biochar, it was even better. So, water. And then there's nutrients. And so the nutrients will stick to the biochar through various kinds of and ionic bonds. It's very complex. Biochar naturally will hold on to a lot of cations because it has those negative charges with all the electrons. And then microbes will move in and they'll start doing their thing, eating and excreting. And now you've got all these organic functional groups and humic acids attaching to the biochar surfaces. So now you can get anions to stick. So, and then it will hold metals and clays, all different kinds of different electrostatic attraction, hydrogen bonding, every kind of chemical interaction you can think of just about happens with biochar and nutrients. This was a really interesting study where composting biochar with a lot of other organic material uh, filled up the biochar surfaces with this organic coating, and they analyzed it and found there were all kinds of nutrients, NPK and lots of other things in this organic coating. So I would call this microbe poop is mostly where it comes from the composting process. Here's an experiment that we did a few years ago. We built a compost pile, biochar and manure, and some straw and garden weeds. And it got very hot very quickly. I find this a lot. There's some nuance into how you're going to add biochar to compost. It can have quite a strong impact. But generally, if you add it in the right amount, in the right way, it's going to improve your composting time, and it'll heat up faster. It'll and it'll also finish faster than compost without biochar, and your compost will have more nutrient. So this particular compost pile, you see we put this kind of chunky biochar in there. And when this was done, when it was all finished, we picked some of the chunks of charcoal out. So I took just the chunks of charcoal, none of the actual other compost, just those little chunks. I ground them up and I did a pot trial. And I put about a tablespoon of this ground up char in each of those pots that you see. And then I did a control that was a plain peat potting soil and another treatment that was worm castings, which, the same amount, a tablespoon, and grew them in a greenhouse for a couple weeks, same amount of seeds in each pot. And I was just amazed at the results. So the composted char had great germination. It had more biomass and more secondary leaves, so growth stimulation, than either of the other two. Comparing it to the control, it's obvious it had more nutrient. Comparing it to the worm castings, it might not have had more nutrient, but it promoted germination because worm castings can have a lot of enzymes and other very active chemicals that can actually inhibit seed germination. So the biochar, the composted, charged up biochar did better than the worm castings. And here's another way that you can kind of take a look at what adding biochar to compost or manure actually does. This is circular chromatography, and it's something you can do at home. You have some filter paper, you soak it in a silver nitrate solution, which is what you would use to do photography. It's like photographic paper. And then you take your sample of soil or compost and you soak it in an alkali solution. So it's an extraction. And then you take a wick, put it at the center of that paper, and it wicks the solution onto the paper. And you can see that these are different. And the difference is that the spikiness really indicates the more complexity. The length of the spikes indicates more complexity, more biological activity. And the colors, the brown color would indicate more humus. When you get into more of a grayish purpley color, it's more mineral. So it's not a quantitative assessment, it's qualitative. And it's very interesting to test some of your materials using this method and see the differences. Um, this um, this technique and also the pot trial are discussed in the Biochar Handbook. So if you pick up that book, you can learn how to do these things yourself. All right, now let's move into how I use biochar now that we've got some ideas about how it works. And here's some principles for how I use it in my little homestead. And these could apply also for a commercial growing operation. So first of all, we want to get all the benefits from the char, and we want those to build on each other, to cascade or stack, in a permaculture sense. So your biochar does more than one job. And starting with just managing your other organic waste streams so it can deodorize and sanitize the smelly, stinky stuff like food waste and manure. And then, it totally improves your composting process. It makes it much faster, better compost. And then you could also use it to substitute for other things that you might have spent a lot of money on. It does the job of peat, perlite, and vermiculite, provide humus, aeration, water holding capacity. You don't really need to buy synthetic soils anymore. You can make your own potting soil using biochar and compost. And then, as you learn how to use it, you realize you can start reducing other inputs because it's going to retain nitrogen. It will improve phosphorus availability by supporting mycorrhizae. And of course, it retains water. So in my household circular economy, here are some of the steps that I use. Urine is one of the most valuable things that we throw away. And I use biochar to process urine, also feces and kitchen scraps. The urine, I think I've seen a study that someone looked at the nutrient content of one person's urine over a year, and that would be enough to grow all the food that they eat over a year. So it really is valuable. And unless someone's really sick, it's safe to use. I use bokashi as well. That's important. So here's how I process the urine. I will start with a 5-gallon bucket and I'll fill it with biochar and I'll sprinkle a little bokashi on top. As you can see in this picture here, there's a little bokashi on top that helps control the ammonia odor. I'll use it till it's full, and then I'll take it out to the garden and empty it into the compost pile. I'll grow some food and I'll eat it, and then I'll make more urine. That's a circular economy. Do the similar thing with kitchen scraps, where start with an empty bucket, and every day I will put my kitchen waste into this bucket, and I'll add a handful of each of these bokashi and biochar. Will ferment once it's full. I'll ferment it for a couple of weeks, and once it's full, I'll start a new bucket, and so I'll have several of these lined up. And then after it's fermented a couple of weeks, I'll empty it into the compost pile. Make compost, grow food and eat. Make kitchen scraps. Humanure is a little more complex. I'll start again with a mostly empty bucket, then I'll add a quart of biochar and make a deposit. And after each deposit, you cover that with a handful of biochar and bokashi. Use the bucket till it's full. Then I empty the buckets into a barrel and store it for a couple of years. Or you could make vermicompost. And those steps are necessary not to deal with pathogens because the bokashi and biochar really deal with pathogens like bacteria, but to deal with worm eggs. There are certain worm eggs that are hard to kill. So that extra step is really needed. Then apply it. And I have not done this in my garden yet. I've only put it on fruit trees, but I'm going to get up the courage one of these days to do that and grow food and make poo and do it all over again. Okay, so that's sort of the constant flow of recycling in my biochar garden. And then here's some other tasks that are sort of on a yearly schedule. So in the winter, I'll make biochar from whatever I have. And I'll also brew a 5-gallon batch of EM1 inoculant that I'll be using throughout the year. In the spring, I'll add biochar to potting soil and start my seedlings. And I will then also harvest the winter compost pile and start a summer pile. And I'll add that biochar compost to the beds and the planting holes. In the summer, I'll build my summer compost pile. And I will also make bokashi and dry it in the greenhouse for storage to use all year. Then in the fall, I'll harvest my summer compost pile and store it in bags for spring. I'll start my winter compost pile with garden cleanup waste, and I'll set aside the more woody material to make biochar in the winter. So here's the summer compost pile. And you see it's being layered here with weeds, some biochar, rock dust, fermented kitchen scraps, pea char, and then a lot of times we'll water it in with some fermented plant juice, and it goes really quickly. Here's the compost pile in winter, and you can see on the left there there's about a cubic yard. I think I counted at least 27 bags of compost that we harvested from the summer pile. I've got the fermented plant juice going in those barrels. And in the background, you see one of my biochar kilns with some weeds ready, stalks and things ready to burn and turn into biochar. So, the upshot is we need to save some money. Um, the whole goal here, and what biochar can really help with, is reducing our garden inputs. And so this is what I purchase for my garden and what I make myself. So biochar, make it myself. The EM1 and Bokashi ingredients, it's really just molasses and wheat bran. So I buy that. It's cheap. It's not a big expense. The food waste, the urine, the weeds, and all of that is free, coming from my household and my garden, recycling it. Some things I buy that are pretty expensive, fish emulsion, crab meal, and kelp meal. I have particular reasons for wanting and needing those inputs, so they're worth it to me. Wood vinegar, not going to talk about this, although there's a lot in my book about it. And I purchased that, but I'm also working on making my own wood vinegar kiln. I just haven't had time yet, but it's a big goal. And rock dust. So my garden is on, it's on a terrace above the river. It's rocks. There's no soil. I mean, theirs is, but it's mostly rocks. So I've had to build up all these beds from scratch. And I have not purchased any soil. I have built them up with manure and compost over time and biochar. And so, the thing is, though, the organic matter is about 30%, and I don't have clay or a lot of minerals. And so I have bought some basalt, and I bought a ton of it, and it cost a ton. And I'm just adding it a little bit at a time, and hopefully, it's going to really stay in my soil, and it has made a difference. So if you don't have a good mineral soil to start with, you may need to add some minerals. And I think this is really the case for a lot of community gardens, and a lot of people who are just starting out and building their soil with compost only. Don't forget the minerals. Okay, other things that are important are tree leaves and manure for mulching compost. And I get those from neighbors. I don't need a ton of that, so it's not hard to find. And then water. And, we cost money to pump water. So if we have biochar in the soil, we can use less water. Okay, I'm going to finish up here with how to make biochar. And it's switching gears a bit, but this is my most important input. So the way you make biochar, the process is called pyrolysis, from pyro, fire, and lysis, which means separation. And you've got your fuel, your wood, take wood. And when you heat it, we've already talked about this, you lose the hydrogen and oxygen and methane and tarry oily stuff, and you're left with char, which is close to pure carbon. So there's different ways of doing this. It's people have been making charcoal for a long time. So I'm going to go through each of these: traditional charcoal kilns, industrial biochar, batch retort kilns, which are interesting, and then the methods I use, which are flame carbonizing methods. So traditional kilns, really, this is how not to make biochar, because they're dirty and wasteful, and we don't want to produce a bunch of smoke when we don't need to. But of course, this was the easiest way to do it. It's time consuming. It's not efficient. It's a smoldering process. So there's no flame. It just smolders. You throw a bunch of wood in a pit, cover it with soil, light one end of it, slowly smolders for days, polluting the air. Makes a good fuel charcoal because some of the volatiles condense back into the char, and that's nice. But boy, don't even think about it. Okay, then there's industrial biochar, and there's many different ways to do this in industrial processes. Um, and one of the nice things about it is you can get energy, recover energy from it. So from a bigger, society-wide perspective, there's really good reasons to be making biochar from any kind of biomass energy process. However, this is huge amount of money. So great if you have $1 million. Otherwise, let's talk about something else. Batch retorts is something that early on when I was getting into biochar seemed like the only way to make biochar at home. And there were some kind of bigger designs that could make bigger batches other than what you could do in just one little barrel. But those are still kind of expensive. We're talking $10,000, $20,000 for one of these retorts, and they don't make very much biochar. Really, it's a lot of work. I made my own here out of a barrel with a recirculating gas pipe. You build a fire under it, and you heat up all that wood in the barrel, and eventually the gas comes out. It's wet at first, it doesn't burn, and then it starts burning, and that's very cool. And I made some very nice biochar, but still, 35 gallons, less than a 55-gallon drum, took 5 or 6 hours of work. Yeah. Um, so I switched to the flame cap kiln. Why? About the same time to run a batch, but I could make more than 10 times the amount. Easier feedstock prep. See how I had to cut all that wood up into little kindling size pieces. Bigger chunks won't work. Wet wood, you can do it with wetter wood. It's actually cleaner because you burn more of the smoke. And the thing about this little barrel is it warped after a couple of times and I couldn't close it tight anymore. So it doesn't work at all. So the flame cap kilns that I use are very durable. Now, what is that? So here's a batch that we made from a flame cap kiln, the Ring of Fire kiln just last week. And that's a couple of cubic yards spread out there on the ground. How does it work? Flame carbonization is a form of pyrolysis, but it's a form of staged combustion. So burning wood happens in stages. Combustion of biomass happens in stages. And the first stage when you apply heat to a piece of wood is it starts to dry. The water leaves. Then the volatile gases leave. Hydrogen, um, CO2, methane, those leave and those burn in a flame. And so that's what a flame is really burning smoke. And at a certain point, at the end stage here, we see just the glowing coals, and you've seen this in a campfire when all the flames are gone and it's just glowing coals. They put out a lot of heat. And if you do nothing, they turn to ash. But if you cut it off right here, you can save the char. So that's all we're doing. So the first method I use is very simple. We call it a conservation burn pile. So if you've ever burned, a pile of branches and sticks and brush and little logs, you've done this. It's a big bonfire. We light it. We try to light it on top so the flame burns the smoke and makes more heat. The process goes faster. This is a pile construction technique that I really like for this. I learned this in California from Machupta Indian crew. And what they do is they just make a nice compact pile of all the smaller stuff and then take the bigger sticks and lay them around in this teepee shape. It helps hold the heat in and then keeps the pile from falling apart. So this is my favorite construction for burn piles. You can see it's kind of all collapsing in on itself and going into that glowing coal stage. And then if you just let it keep burning, it's going to burn to ash. It's going to burn the organic soil underneath and create a burn scar that will attract weed seeds. Not good. This looks like it's ash, but there's actually a big pile of coals under there. It's just starting to ash over. This is the perfect time to put it out. And so we do that by spraying it with water and raking it thin to lose the heat and end up with quite a bit of char. So I've got 3 5-gallon buckets here and another at least 5 gallons left for the forest soil. This is a big part of my work these days, actually, is trying to figure out how to make biochar in the woods, mostly to leave in the woods, to build up our forest soils and bring our forests back into a healthier condition. And one of the things we've been doing is in the char piles we leave in the forest, we're seeding with native plants. That's what these wildflowers are. We seeded those, and the germination was great because the char holds water. The mushrooms came up on their own, but this is a big part of my work. All right, method number 2 is take that burn pile and put it in a container, and you can make even more char. And this idea, I first heard about it in the context of these people in Japan who have been using this kind of kiln for, probably, I don't know how long, but I saw these pictures and read a paper or two about it and wanted to try it. So this is the concept, how it works, where you've got your burn pile in the bin and there's no air coming from the bottom. All the air comes from the top, no air coming from the sides. So as the material flames up and turns into char, the char falls to the bottom and there's no air there, so it's preserved. And you just keep adding more material and the flame uses up all the air at the top. No air can get in the bottom, and you can accumulate a whole container full of char. So this is my product that I make. It's called the Ring of Fire Kiln, and I've sold hundreds of them. They're becoming quite popular. They're very easy to use. And this is how it works. So it's just a simple steel ring with another ring around it for a heat shield. All the air comes from the top. It circulates underneath and back up, and then additional air comes through the heat shield and preheats, and it makes for a very clean burn. So here you can see that counterflow combustion. As the burning fuel draws the air downward, you can sometimes see these flame tips curling down. And here you can see how that ring of fire kiln actually starts burning the smoke, because the smoke tries to come up, but then the airflows are pulling it back down where it burns in the flame. The heat shield is actually very effective for just being one sheet of steel. And that's great when you're working around these kilns, because you can get pretty well cooked if you don't have the heat shield. And so it protects the worker, also improves the speed and efficiency of the conversion process. And the other thing about this design is that it's easy to move around, because it's panels that you put together in the field. They just bolt together easily. You can take it apart and throw it in the back of a station wagon, take it anywhere you need to. You don't need a truck. So this is the basic process. We'll put the kiln together, we'll load it up, we'll light it on the top. We'll continue to load it for a couple of hours. It consumes an amazing amount of brush and sticks and wood. And then at the end, we open it up, rake it out, spray it with water, and we have our char. Always start with small stuff for the first loading because we want it to burn quickly and get nice and hot. Always light it on the top all the way around evenly. And we'll burn it down till, the first charge, until we burn it down and start getting some ash. So we know we've got coals forming, and then we'll start adding more. And we'll just add more, and we use the flame as our guide, because we always want that flame. That's our heat that does the conversion process. So we don't want to let it die down. We want to keep that flame going until the kiln is pretty much full, or we've used up all our feedstock. So, we fill it about 2/3 full, half to 2/3. And then now it's starting to ash over again. The flames are dying down, and it's time to harvest our char. So we open it up, we spray it with water, we spread it thin, and make a couple of cubic yards of char in 4 or 5 hours. You can make smaller batches in smaller containers. This is a suburban backyard with a little kind of fire pit size biochar kiln. Um, you can even make it in a barbecue grill. So it's not hard. Anybody can do this. Start with a little bit of kindling, stack it up, light it on top in your kettle grill, close off the vents at the bottom, and it'll turn to charcoal. You can grill something quickly and then put it out with water and make your own charcoal. All right, that's all I have for you today. If you want to know more about, some of these techniques, I would encourage you to register for my practical biochar course at Regenerative Living through December 26th. We've got early bird registration. Just check out Regenerative Living online for that. Get my book. I think you'll find it to be of value. If you want a ring of fire kiln, ringofire.earth is where you can go and start the ordering process for a kiln. I'm trying to get more videos up on a YouTube channel. I'm writing a regular column about what I'm doing at Substack called the Biochar Prepper. So thanks again to Matt for doing this, and really happy to share what I know with all of you. And have a great week.